Hi, everybody. I'm Natalie Brunell, and thanks so much for checking out my show where I get to hear from the leading voices in Bitcoin, financial markets, political structures, philosophy, and more. Please make sure that you subscribe to my page and like this video so more people see it and so that you don't miss out on any new content. This podcast does not provide financial advice. It is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This show wouldn't be possible without support from my sponsors. First and foremost, Swan Bitcoin. Swan is where I do all of my Bitcoin purchases, and I dollar cost average every single day with the lowest fees in the space. And I love Swan because it's a Bitcoin only company. Swan Studios produces my new show, Hard Money, covering the biggest news in Bitcoin and the global economy. It's like an orange pilled version of CNBC. So make sure to check that out on YouTube for all the biggest headlines because we are not afraid to question the mainstream narrative. And Swan is putting on the first and biggest West Coast Bitcoin only conference, Pacific Bitcoin. It'll be held November 10th and 11th in the LA area with prominent speakers like Lynn Alden and Preston Pish. I'm very excited to be the MC for the event alongside Peter McCormick and Stefan Livera. So if you want to get your ticket with 20% off, use the code HODL at pacificbitcoin.com. All right, it's time for the show. All right, well, Will, it's so good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on as a guest on Coin Stories.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks for having me.
So I want to hear a little bit about your background. I had Parker on a couple of months ago. And so I know the two of you, Parker Lewis and you, kind of grew up near each other. So tell me a little bit about your young life. And, I always like to hear just what people wanted to be when they grew up and sort of their financial background.
Yeah, when I was a kid, grew up in a pretty idyllic scenario, suburban Austin, Texas, family of programmers. My dad was a programmer. My brother was a programmer. My uncle was a programmer. My mom was a school teacher, so the one non-programmer. But yeah, and I did grow up. I met Parker when I was 3 years old, and in our preschool together, along with several other friends we still see weekly. But yeah, growing up west of Austin, and what I wanted to be when I grew up was likely, I think I was pretty obsessed with being a baseball player pretty much the entire time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
What happened with that?
I wasn't a very good hitter. I was okay at baseball, but you get up in those levels and people start throwing things that move 9 inches, at a time when you're trying to swing at it. Not so good at that.
Well, that's interesting that so many people in your family were programmers. So did you naturally gravitate toward that as well? Like, what did you study in school?
Yeah. So, programming in my family, I mean, it wasn't like anything pushy or anything, but we had a lot of computers around as a kid in the, late 80s. I started, messing with computers. My dad would just sort of leave them for us. He wouldn't really tell us much. It was just sort of, here's a computer, see what you can do with it. And I had my older brother, is 4 years older than me. And so he was much more proficient and capable. And so one of the things that I would do is, he would teach me little, basic programs and things I could do. But I think it was PC Magazine. They had code snippets on the back of the magazines when I was a kid. And when we go to bookstores or the grocery store, pick up like PC Gamer or PC magazines, and they had these little code snippets, and they were typically they didn't really tell you what the program was, if I remember, but I could copy all the code and then something would happen. And sometimes it would be a game of Hangman, and then sometimes it would be, a spreadsheet, and you never really, and I didn't. But that's kind of how I got into it. It was just sort of computers were around, they're available, but not necessarily. It wasn't something I studied in school. They didn't really have programming courses in school. They had computer classes, but those. You played Oregon Trail in them, and that's about it, right?
Oh my God, I remember Oregon Trail. That was what I remember from the early times of having a computer, was having a Compaq with that and like early AOL with startup.
Was a Compaq your first computer?
Yes.
I believe that was a Texas company. I think they're out of Houston. They're really big around here. I had a TRS-80, which you could which was even old for when I got it, but I would get the hand-me-downs, and it was actually a laptop that you could it didn't have like a foldable screen. It just had like kind of like a calculator screen at the top of it, but you buy them at Radio Shack and they were awesome. Great keyboard too, like best keyboards.
Well, so what did you do for your early career?
Early career, yeah. So I studied economics in school and was
Austrian
very,
economics?
oh God, I got a terrible, no, no. I didn't know anything about Austrian economics until, my heroes, Michael Goldstein and Pierre Richard, set me straight, these, which I'm much older than them, but they, they're the ones who brought me down that path. No, I got a pretty classical, terrible Keynesian economics education, despite going to one of the more conservative universities in the United States at SMU in Dallas, and then was going to leave and do like investment banking. I had a job planned in Fort Worth, Texas, and funny enough, Parker comes back in the story here. Is my brother had called me and said, "You really don't want to do that. You don't want to be an investment banker. You're going to hate yourself." And come up to New York and do like a startup with me. And I was like, "What startup?" He's like, "I don't know. We'll figure it out." And so I called Parker and I just asked him, "What plane are you getting on to New York?" Because he was going up there to be an investment banker. Hopped on a plane with him and figured it out. So I did a startup with my brother. That was kind of my foray into the real world, although that wasn't really the real world.
Well, I want to hear a little bit more. What was the startup and how did you slowly make your way down the path to ultimately finding and appreciating Bitcoin?
Yeah. So the startup was called Chalk. It was a fantasy sports startup. Um, uh, 2006 is when I graduated, and there was a Supreme Court case that banned online gambling at the time. So there's a little Bitcoin connection there, since Satoshi liked online poker. But online gambling had been banned as of 2006, but there was a specific exemption for fantasy sports. And so we thought that we could build kind of a traditional fantasy sports game that also incorporated gambling attributes. So think things like FanDuel and DraftKings and things like that today. Those came out a little bit later, but in 2006 we knew there was some sort of thing there that we could find a loophole in the Supreme Court case and get online gambling in the United States. We raised some money for it in 2007. Small team with 4 people or so, but then the financial crisis came, and I won't blame that for the failure of the startup. I mean, it became very difficult to raise capital once Sequoia put out their press release. I think it was called like the end of the good times or something like that. It was the end of startup capital. Which it was for a few years. And we didn't have much. We didn't have FanDuel. We didn't have DraftKings. We didn't have that. We were still tinkering too much. And but being in New York City, around that time, for me it was the failure of that business. Going in, I took a job at Thomson Reuters for a little bit, just doing financial services software for investment banks, stuff like that. Did another startup, and then joined Stack Overflow. But right around that time, I'd been working on the Ron Paul campaign a little bit. Not working on, I was around people that were working on the Ron Paul campaign. I was a Ron Paul enthusiast. And in that from 2008 to 2011 period in New York, hanging out with those guys had become a little bit of a gold bug. And really learning about a little bit about the Austrian school at that time. Hadn't really gone deep yet, and it was that cast of characters. And really, it started with my brother that introduced me to Bitcoin in April of 2011. But it wasn't until later that year in early 2012 where it started to sink in for me.
Wow. Wait, did you by any chance know VJ? Was VJ working on his campaign at the time? VJ Boyapati?
So I know VJ. I did not know him at the time. No.
Okay.
I knew. Oh gosh, Nick Spanos and some of those guys were running around there. Nick was running the Ron Paul phone bank out of Soho. Some of the guys with him, I know he's been in some Bitcoin documentaries before, and he opened up the physical exchange. So some of those guys that were connected to Ron Paul. I don't remember all their names, but honestly, there were people coming through New York at that time. Eric Voorhees, I met back then. Roger Ver, Trace Mayer. And I really was just like trying to soak in information from them. I felt very naive, especially because I didn't have that good economic backbone.
Well, I was going to say, because since you had such a traditional Keynesian sort of background, what do you think was it that maybe predisposed you to appreciate it and to open up your ears and listen and become a gold bug before Bitcoin?
The gold bug stuff was definitely the Ron Paul campaign. Just like, it just it just made logical sense to me. Remember, this is right around the time of QE2. So we'd gone through the financial crisis. We had started printing a bunch of money. My brother at the time had an apartment that overlooked the New York Fed. And we used to sort of like talk together and fantasize, like, what the fuck is going on in there? Why are there, and I'm sure it was not a big deal, but why are there, 18 wheelers with paper shredders on the back of them? And, it was very opaque. And it's the first time in American politics where it was okay to say the word trillion and people wouldn't flinch, right? And that scared the shit out of me. And being around this, sort of libertarian Austrian group, and talking about the gold standard and learning about the gold standard at the time was very, I was very impressionable for it because the world seemed like it was collapsing all around me. You had Occupy Wall Street right up the street. I wasn't a part of that, but definitely sympathized with some of the message that was coming out of there.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I do remember a little bit of that. And I didn't understand how our financial system worked back then. And I didn't understand that where they should actually be protesting is not Wall Street, but
Down the
1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, in Washington,
Yeah.
D.C. for incentivizing all of what was happening. But okay, so tell me a little bit about the time where, you heard about Bitcoin, but then you finally decided to actually invest. You grew your conviction. I mean, what kind of helped you understand that Bitcoin is this sort of bulletproof alternative system?
Yeah, it took a while. I was never like, dismissive of Bitcoin by any means, but it's hard to, I wasn't like Trace Mayer. Trace Mayer was on YouTube saying buy Bitcoin for a nickel, and yelling at everyone to do it. And in early 2011 or mid 2011 or so, I thought it was really interesting, but it's kind of cringy thinking about it now. But like, I would like go around to my friends and be like, "Hey, you see this thing? It solves the Byzantine generals problem," and like that's the way I talked about it at the time, because I didn't have a sophisticated view of money. But also, I would say that like, Bitcoin, even by 2015 or 2014, was very different than Bitcoin 2011 because so much of what we know gives Bitcoin value is not just the fact that it's a limited supply and but that the limited supply can be enforced credibly, right? And so Bitcoin's credibility was still to be determined. So I give myself a little bit of a pass for not dumping my entire life savings in at that time, just because credibility is so much of what makes Bitcoin different from altcoins. Understanding Nakamoto consensus is one of the things that gives it credibility and makes you realize, the fact that the 21 million limit is indeed credible, right? And I guess like that transition for me, I think that was your question, right? Like the transition for me was, building up that own credibility in my mind. And in order to do that, I had to get exposed and go deeper, like, understanding Austrian economics. One of the big helps for that was learning about Murray Rothbard. Michael and Pierre had Murray Rothbard pilled me around 2014, or I think 2014, 2015.
How did you meet them?
Online.
Okay.
Well, my brother had met them. Again, everything kind of moves through my brother. He's an older brother. I'm a little brother. He brings me the cool stuff, and then I figure out what to do with it. But I believe he met them first, and then we talked online because I still lived in New York. They were in Austin. They were at the University of Texas. They were still in school. They had an Austrian group at the University of Texas, like a club, like an economics club. And I had tried to read von Mises, Menger before, and while I appreciate it a lot, it's kind of hard to get through. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure some people will get mad at me, but it took me a year to read Human Action, like a whole year, because I like hated doing it, even though it's phenomenal and it's foundational. But what I found out is that Murray
Sense, yeah.
Rothbard is just the same thing for an American audience. Like, reading, Man, Economy, and State is more of a textbook, but I could get through it really easily. The translations weren't weird, and just sort of that idea that money is something that emerges from the market, and not something that's generated by fiat was was the thing for me that made me appreciate Bitcoin. Even though I'd been in it at that point for a few years, it gave me the conviction to really see this as something that was permanent and decidedly better.
I think it is really interesting how the Bitcoin rabbit hole and journey for so many people, myself included, it really does take years. And I started to nibble at first and I was very skeptical and I thought I was going to lose all my money. And then it grew to, putting in a little bit more, but nowhere near, I wouldn't have put in 50 to 50% or more. And now literally I like put almost everything into Bitcoin, which is probably among the more extreme in this
Mm-hmm.
space. But were you the same? Were you like, okay, I have a little bit of an allocation, maybe that grew, it turned into from, 1% to 5% or 10%. Are you like, how deep in are you?
Pretty deep. If only my kids knew how much of their future relied on this working. you know, no, but okay. Well, there's a couple layers to what you just said there. First of all, like in terms of how deep, I've never seen it as, I guess since like 2013 or 2014, I've never seen it as particularly risky because I did have this view, and I've had this saying that I tell people, which is like, look, Bitcoin could fail. It could. I don't think it will. I think the probability is very low, but I'm not too worried about getting dollars. I hear they're making more of them. It's like at the end of the day, you can always go, at least for me, like I'm confident in like the value I can bring to a company or to a startup or something. And like, I can always go get money. Like that's not going to be a big problem. So it doesn't go through my brain. Like I don't sort of analyze it as particularly risky. And I'm not one of those people that wants to do nothing and just sit around at the beach somewhere. But to the point of like getting those allocations higher. I mean, like certainly the number go up technology does make you take notice because at first it was like nothing. It was a few $100, and then it was tens of thousands, and it's hundreds of thousands. You're like, oh shit, that's one of the I got to take this more seriously, and then you know change my security posture and all these things. But really, for me, it was like events. There were little events that happened throughout the time. 2013, I believe it was March 2013. I have a little tweet pinned on my that asked the question in 2013: what would you rather own, 50 euros in a European bank or one Bitcoin? And at the time, I had like 30 followers, and like no one cared. But what I was saying, that was the day that Cyprus had seized I think it was any money in a bank account from a citizen that exceeded $10,000 then became property of the state. And and that was like an event that I'd never had any money, so I never had anything that anyone could take away from. I was renting an apartment. I was young in my career at the time. I didn't have very much money, so there was nothing. I didn't think about things like counterparty risk and government seizures, or anything like that. But that got my attention. That a government decided we're going to take, in a modern, European bank, we're going to take any money over $10,000 from your account. And so that was like an event that gave me more conviction in Bitcoin. Another event was Silk Road, and not for the reasons I think that a lot of people would think of. By the way, part of my origin story, I went to school with Ross. We were classmates until eighth
That's what
grade.
I heard. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, yeah. If anyone's thinking of donating money, his mom runs a good. I should know the domain, but I don't have it right now. But anyway, but the Silk Road, the moment in Silk Road, the event that gave me more conviction was that when the United States government seized the Bitcoin from Ross, they didn't destroy it and they didn't keep it. They just sold it. They just sold it. And I think Tim Draper bought like half of it or all of it or something like that. And in that moment, I looked at my brother and I was like, oh shit, like this is huge. Because when we always sort of theorize, like when the government takes this seriously, like what are they going to do? Like, are they going to ban it? Are they going to, go after people that have been tweeting about this?
right.
But the fact that they were just selling it on the open market, I was like, well, they don't sell the cocaine that they seize. They don't sell the heroin. So that was another conviction moment of like, hey, this is going to be harder and harder to ban. This is going to be harder. There's a lot of other reasons that it's hard to ban, but for me, that was just a moment in my journey where I was like, okay, like this has more stability than I was giving it credit. Um, so yeah, Silk Road, Cyprus. being that entire time was, more QE, more QE. Oh, we're going to unroll QE. Oh, we can't do that or else the economy is going to collapse. Moving back to Austin, Texas in 2014, all these things sort of collided where like every year Bitcoin gained more credibility. My conviction went, higher in it, and, number was going up, generally speaking, and it became more and more of my allocation. So
well, so I got
irresponsibly deep in.
Me too. A lot of my listeners are as well. Well, so tell me a little bit about the path to Unchained, and now you're working with one of your best friends, the mayor, self-proclaimed, I think, mayor of Austin, Texas. I just want to hear a little bit more. We got Parker's version of the genesis of that, but tell us a little bit about how you ended up with Unchained.
Yeah, so I was working for a New York company called Stack Overflow. It's awesome. Very proud of it. It's if you're a programmer out there in the world, you know what I'm talking about. Every programmer in the world uses Stack Overflow every day, and I was very happy.
What is that? What is that company?
Stack Overflow is a question and answer site for programmers. So if you say we're debugging your software, and you're getting an error and you don't know why, you could, usually you go there and the answer is already there. If it's not, you can ask a question about it. Also has a fantastic Bitcoin stack exchange where it's probably the best way to get an answer from Peter Woola or Andrew Chow or Murch or Jimmy Song. Like they're all there, And so for the more technical audience, Stack Overflow, like I said, every programmer in the world uses it pretty much every day. So it's around 60 million people, more people using it than are programmers. But anyway, the point of that is that I was very happy. It was a passion of mine to do that. And growing up in a family of programmers and all that, like it was a cool project. It was a cool job. I was like cool in like uncool circles, and
I love it.
so there was no like immediate need for me to like jump into like a Bitcoin company because I was very passionate about what I was doing. But I joined the blockchain task force in Wyoming in 2018, 2019. And that was started by Tyler Lindholm, who now works with Cynthia Lummis. And who I know you just recently had on. Anyway, it was a legislative body in Wyoming that allowed that had 3 citizen members, and I was one of the 3 citizen members. And we passed all this legislation that kind of put Wyoming on the map as being a friendly jurisdiction for Bitcoin companies, all that stuff. And during that time, when I was talking to all the people coming through there, and we were talking about Bitcoin, they were like, "What the hell are you doing? Like, why are you not working on this?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know what I do." But I got that question enough and was flattered that I decided to go look and see if there was anything I could, if I could provide value anywhere. My initial view was that I couldn't provide value because I couldn't provide code to the core protocol, and therefore I might as well just keep my day job and be an investor and advocate and do whatever I could, on the political side. And then when I started doing that, Parker, going back a little bit, Parker and I had been going skiing a lot, and he's going to hate that I say this. Parker just didn't give a shit when I talked about Bitcoin for years, like years and years. And then while he was working at Unchained Capital, we take these long drives when we were going skiing together. And one day, I think I said something rather stupid, and like I often do, and it clicked for him. Something in his brain started taking it seriously. I can't remember what I said. And he also had other influences in his life, other than me, but like it sort of happened in this moment. And so knowing that we had that history, when I told Parker that I was going to leave Stack, which before was not really an option, he started recruiting me to come to Unchained. And it was really just about getting comfortable with Joe and Drew, who had started the company, with their vision. And I think Parker had said something to me that really made me want to come here, which was, if Bitcoin's money, what's the product of money? Because I'm a product person. I was trying to figure out where I could add value, and it was like the product of money is financial services, and that's what we're building here. Exchange. I didn't really want to work on an exchange, and it was just like exchange is just one financial service of dozens or hundreds that we can do here. And he also sold me on a really clear vision of custody sitting at the middle of financial services, and that if we could solve custody in a way that worked for individuals but also for businesses, that the sky was the limit in terms of the type of institution that we could build here.
All right, let's talk about Bitcoin 2023 and Bitcoin Amsterdam. Here's a look at Miami 2022, but Bitcoin Magazine and the team that brought you the world's largest Bitcoin conference is bringing the mission of hyper Bitcoinization global with the inaugural European gathering this fall. Bitcoin Amsterdam will take place on October 12th through the 14th at a beautiful venue in the heart of the city. Join thousands of Bitcoiners for 3 days of curated Bitcoin content that is relevant to the emerging Bitcoin scene in Europe and the global movement. Confirmed speakers include Dr. Adam Back, Alex Gladstein, Greg Foss, Ray Youssef, and many, many more. The European installment of Sound Money Fest will also take place on day 3 of the event, October 14th, and admission is included with GA and Will passes. And after Bitcoin Amsterdam, which I'm so excited to attend, is of course Bitcoin 2023. It's going to be held again in Miami next May, and you can head to b.tc/conference. Use the code HODL, HODL, for 10% off your tickets to both BTC 2023 and Bitcoin Amsterdam. I will see you there. And finally, I want to thank my partner, Fold. Fold is the best Bitcoin rewards debit card and shopping app in the world. You can earn Bitcoin on everything you purchase with Fold's Bitcoin Cashback debit card and win free Satoshis every day, or even a whole Bitcoin by spinning the daily wheel and purchase rewards wheels. Fold app is one of the best ways for someone completely new to Bitcoin to enter the space and start earning and learning. You can head to foldapp.com/Natalie for 5,000 sats when you sign up. All right, back to the show. Well, you know what it's like to start your own company. And a lot of people I think out there are just curious about either how to get into the space or what it's like to work in the space. So what kind of insights can you share?
Oh yeah. Startups are a great way to get into the space because look, most Bitcoin companies are startups, right? And it's very hard to get legacy companies to create a Bitcoin roadmap or strategy. So they're mostly startups right now. They're mostly Lightning startups, I guess. And I've talked about this a little bit, but it depends on what you want to do. Obviously, if you're a programmer, like you got it made in the shade, man. Like they all need you. But if you're doing something else, it's asking the same question that I was asking myself, like where can I provide value? If you're an accountant, go be an accountant at a Bitcoin company, right? If you want to get into product and you've never worked in product before, second guess yourself because it's way harder than it looks. And second is, go be a jack of all trades at an early stage startup where you get the coffee, but you also manage a Jira board. There are ways to do that. I would say that the other way to do it is to go more traditional, go work at one of the big tech companies or something like that, develop the skills that will make you more valuable, and then, go straight to the top at one of these, smaller companies. For us at Unchained, a lot of I wouldn't say we exclusively look for Bitcoiners, but I would say that like a passion for the domain definitely helps. I have a feeling that if you were building this product and you didn't care about Bitcoin, this might be a pretty boring job. But look, we need programmers, we need accountants, we need customer support people. Like a passion for the domain goes a long way, and that's what I tried to do my entire career. Like whether it was Stack Overflow or Unchained, is just like, if you have that skill, you might as well use it on something you care about.
That's so interesting you say that because I'm obviously in like a different part of the industry in terms of like content, but I've even tried to get help on my side. And it's, there are so many people out there that can do things like edit or, write for video. But if they don't understand Bitcoin, it's like worthless, right? Because they're not going to know what to clip and what to write and all of that. So that's really interesting. So I want to talk a little bit more about what Unchained is doing. Parker covered a little bit of the custody, the importance of not your keys, not your coins, and multi-sig and all of that. But you guys had a recent announcement, right? So the company's growing even in the bear market and adding on some extra products and services. So what did you guys want to share?
Yeah. Bear market is a good time to stack sats. No, the announcement that we made at BitBlock Boom was that more broadly now in 30 states in the United States, soon enough to be in all 50, we have a new trading product that allows you to buy Bitcoin directly to cold storage keys that you control. That's a mouthful. The value of that might not be immediately apparent, but I'll tell a few stories to explain the value of buying directly to cold storage. Is that when we think about counterparty risk, I think that it can be kind of vague. I think most people tend to think about exchange hacks. They, counter to the extent that they're thinking about counterparty risk at all. They think, well, if my coins are at, Coinbase or Kraken or whatever, they could be hacked, right? And that's true. It's definitely true, but I don't think it's the most immediate concern that people should be having. There are a lot of ways you can lose your Bitcoin if you don't hold the keys, and exchange hacks are just one small part of it. And so as we built up our custody business, we're gaining customers that bought their Bitcoin on one of the exchanges, typically, right? And then they find their custody, the Bitcoin finds its final resting place, right, with us. And what we wanted to do was sort of short circuit that path. Well, if it ends up here in this custody model, why didn't it start here? And there's compliance reasons why and all this stuff. So we had to build sort of a first-class trading product with all the compliance bells and whistles to make sure that all that risk that people were taking on their journey to self custody and multi-sig, that they could start their journey there or continue their journey there. And so our trading product is really an extension of our custody model. It's an extension of the idea that look, we're in a bear market right now, but all of a sudden, before you know it, Bitcoin will be $100,000, and your $10,000 is going to turn into $100,000, is going to turn into $1 million, because that's what Bitcoin does. And when you do that, you want to upgrade your security posture. And so our core custody model is basically 2 of 3 multi-sig. Parker's explained it. People have explained that before, but now you get to trade right into it, and you get to avoid all those single points of failure. And lines like "not your keys, not your Bitcoin," they come from pain. We wouldn't have that saying if people hadn't lost fortunes over and over and over again. And sometimes I think the weight of a saying like that can be lost on newer people in the space. Is that it's not if, it's when. It's inevitable, right? We learned that with the lending platforms recently, right? And I'm not sure, Natalie, if you saw all those videos of Saifedean talking to whatever CEO of Celsius, and the CEO of Celsius is laughing at him, oh, the good times are here. This is perfectly safe. And all Safe can say is money doesn't grow on trees, and what he's saying in his head is you fraud, you charlatan, and that's just another example of people taking these counterparty risk measures where, look, you have an asset that goes up on average over 100% a year. Eking out a few percentage points here and there is not going to make a long-term difference, and you're way better off self-custodying. And I think that this trading product really helps, again, shorten that lifespan of getting you from where you should be to just starting there.
Well, you mentioned just a couple of seconds ago talking about the idea of $100,000 Bitcoin, which for so many people, they thought it was going to happen last year. And I know it's not about the US dollar price, all that. One Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. But what certainty would you attribute that prediction that it's going to go to 100,000? Are you 100% sure? Or would you say
oh gosh.
how confident are you? And when would you say that would happen, given the crazy macro environment with, even now with the recent price drops and everything that's happening in Europe? The Fed is just so intent on fighting inflation. They're probably going to they have to raise their target from 2% to maybe 4%, right? We've never been, these are unprecedented times. And the next go around is going to take even more money printing. We thought it was bad in response to the pandemic. Now we're going to be in 10 trillion. We're going to need to pour trillions onto it. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, if Bitcoin's not 100,000, then it's zero, right? It's either valuable or it's not. We're playing a game of not just price discovery, but of credibility and viability of Bitcoin being around for a long time. So if Bitcoin's around for a long time, $100,000 is bearish. That's a joke. That's still 10% of gold's market cap or something close to that. And I'm not a big macro guy. Everything I know about macro, I learned from Parker and Preston Pish and Lynn Alden and all these smart people you've had on your podcast before. But, just taking like a first principles idea about it is that if Bitcoin is the most saleable good, and that money converges on one, and that the fiat, house of cards that we've seen, at least in my life, from 2008 until this point, continues, and I don't see how it couldn't. As close to 100% as I can be, without some existential disaster that ends life on Earth, right? It just seems inevitable, which is why I've been so irresponsibly long Bitcoin for this much time. You just have to wait it out. And it'll happen. That's kind of my view on it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's really interesting because I just, 69 was not the top, right? It might take us a while to get back up there for other reasons. And I can't wait for when Bitcoin finally decouples from other risk assets. It's going to need a lot more education, but, to think that Bitcoin will never see 100,000, that's like silly to me. But
I mean, when you've seen Bitcoin go from $200 to $3, like, you tend not to get so spooked by, a 66% drop. Like, it's nothing.
Yeah. Okay. I was wondering if you might share a little bit about orange pilling someone like Senator Cynthia Lummis, because obviously you have a special connection to her, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, honestly, it was pretty easy. You've talked to her. She's brilliant. She has a really sturdy economic background. She was state treasurer of Wyoming. I just happened to be someone who mentioned Bitcoin to her first, and then help her buy her first Bitcoins. 2013 or 24. I forget. It was a Christmas 2013, 2014 time period, when her daughter Annalise and I were about to get married. And no, I mean, like, with Cynthia, it was really easy. I think it took a few minutes, and then she just got it. Like anyone else, it takes a little bit of time to like fully appreciate it. But I think right away she saw value. Right away she saw what was going on with the dollar, and I think what she's intimated to me and in public several times is that, like, Cynthia's a patriot. She believes in the United States, and she's spent a lot of her time since 2008, when she first went to Congress, defending, against reckless spending and defending the dollar's debasement. But if that doesn't work, we better have Bitcoin. It's kind of what she said many times. In terms of orange pilling her, though, I mean, I wish I had a juicier story. It was like, I told her about Bitcoin for 5 minutes. She's like, "That's cool. Show me more. Let's buy some." And she was in, right away.
I love it. I love it. Well, talk to me a little bit more about this, because you worked on Ron Paul's campaign. Now you know Senator Lummis really well, but there are a lot of people within the Bitcoin space that, they want to end the Fed, and they don't want there to even be a federal government. And they're far on that extreme of, we have some really big prominent voices that are total anarchists. And I think when we're in that kind of gray area of regulatory clarity and questions, and what are these politicians going to be doing? Is it going to be politicized? What do you want people to know? Because I mean, at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, we're going to have elected officials, at least for the next couple of, I would say, years.
Yeah, if we can't get that hereditary monarchy going in the next few years, so we're kind of stuck with this for a while. No, I mean, I remember, whether it's Cynthia or anyone else, right, is like, Bitcoin doesn't need politicians. And as we've seen, China's politicians have taken a very adversarial, posture towards Bitcoin, and it's still chugging along just fine. And that's happened in many jurisdictions. The United States, I mean, I'm not sure people would love to hear this, but like, it's been pretty good for Bitcoin. I mean, we have great Bitcoin companies being built here. The SEC is not gunning for Bitcoin, at least under Gensler. Having it designated as a commodity under the CFTC is not a bad deal for us right now. They sell Bitcoin on the open market. Like, I haven't seen too many things that are adversarial towards Bitcoin in particular. I have seen things that look dark for certain altcoins and shitcoins out there, but But for Bitcoin, I feel like we're creating those jurisdictions, but also, if you're a Bitcoin maximalist, you should be a 10th Amendment maximalist in the United States. And the fact that Wyoming can outpace the federal government, and then that Texas can start catching up there, and Florida and Nevada and all these places in their own little micro jurisdictions, with the idea that states are sovereigns. And I remember when we were on the task force in Wyoming, and we passed a bill one time. I forget which one, but we were really concerned with, I think it was FinCEN, coming down on us, and doing what's called like federal preemption, and basically passing a federal law just to screw us over and make our law invalid. And when we got done, after they had given us a lot of grief, they're like, "Hey, just wait a couple years. We're catching up." It's like, we don't have a couple years. And the credit to the legislative body there, they just did it, and we passed it. And then we talked to those same people, and we're like, "You mad?" And they're like, "No, it's fine. I mean, you're a state. You can do whatever the hell you want." State sovereignty is such a big deal. And I think that the United States is uniquely sort of positioned to have a really good environment for Bitcoin companies and individuals to hold private keys, just because we get these protections from our states that I think the federal government will have a lot of trouble messing with. I mean, it's built into our Constitution, and it matters. But I don't want to be like a shill for government here. I mean, like, Bitcoin doesn't need government officials to like it. I remember, Chuck Schumer was around in 2011 talking about Bitcoin. I mean, 2011, Chuck Schumer was talking about how terrible Bitcoin was, and sounding the alarms. And they've known about it for a long time. Important, in quotes, important people, right? Known about it for a long time. But it would be nice not to have an adversary. It would make things a little bit easier. Maybe we'll all see sound money, for ourselves and our kids, in our lifetimes, instead of, later, if we don't have to fight so much. And so that's good. Building allies, even on the fringes, just not being openly hostile, is a good thing for us.
I'm curious what you think about the transition to more and more people moving into Bitcoin, because obviously it represents this sort of neutral, potentially reserve currency. And, a lot of people, big voices, even, in the business world at large, like people like Balaji, who I know is not just for Bitcoin, talks about the idea of network states and like sort of deglobalization after decades of globalization. Do you think that this will be sort of peaceful? As you mentioned, we don't have that many adversaries with Bitcoin right now in the US, but as it maybe threatens the US dollar down the road, or things start to play out with countries developing their own SWIFT systems, and like, do you think that this could be peaceful, or do you think that is this something that worries you? Like, I've met a lot of preppers and people who are building out, their little citadels and getting ready for something that could be potentially a clash of two worlds.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Well, I'm not a philosopher king like Balaji, and I'm no guru, but can it be peaceful? Yes. But again, the United States, for as much shit as people like to talk about us, around the world and even internally, and is we have other things going for us other than states' rights. We have a Second Amendment as well. We're allowed to own guns. I think it's really important. That's personal sovereignty. Right. And we have a particular culture in the United States where I think that, if we're really doing like, in game type things here, like, could Bitcoin end the dollar? I think absolutely. And I think it will. Will that be peaceful? Well, I think it depends. Right. Like, the United States could take a very proactive approach to put themselves in the most advantageous position as a sovereign nation to have Bitcoin and to have some influence in Bitcoin. Not that like any government's going to be able to influence ultimate outcomes, but they can be a part of the game. Just like everyone else is, just like miners are, and programmers are, and investors are, and node operators are. They can be all those things too, and they can fucking buy Bitcoin, right? Now, does that change the way the United States operates? Like, obviously, if you can't debase your currency, which is like the number one tool they have at their disposal to presumably, balance the economy and the job market and all of that, yeah, things are going to have to be a little bit different, but it's been different before. When we were on a gold standard, you couldn't debase the currency, unless you were, a Roman, emperor who, thought you could make a gold coin smaller, like there was no way to do that. Right. And so like, can it be peaceful? Like, absolutely. Could it be pretty rough? Like, yeah. But again, the United States is, I do care about living here and I'm proud to live here and I'm proud of most of what the United States actually is. And for a nation to take a lead on Bitcoin, we're as well prepped as anyone else, right? To do it. And the consequences of not is we're as well prepped for the consequences as anyone else, more so than any other country. And it's not because I'm some tough guy, it's because we had, more guns than people here. And it ain't so easy. They can't just, do it with force.
Well, I know I'm kind of being bearish right now, but is there anything that really you'd say is the biggest vulnerability that Bitcoin has? The thing that would keep you up at night?
Nothing really keeps me up at night. I mean, I think that the thing I feel the most sense of urgency on around Bitcoin is reaching parity with other financial systems in terms of like industry tools, right? It's one of the reasons why, again, I asked myself, how can I provide value? Because, like anyone else, I only think about myself. And but like, what I mean by that is, people finding ways to create the tools and the things that we need in order for people to get the benefits of the core protocol. The core protocol exists and it has all these benefits and it defines its monetary policies, and Bitcoin has all these advantages over everything else, but it's about making that accessible to people to hold generational wealth, whether that's custody tools or exchange tools or inheritance protocols or whatever you do with money, right? So, I right now I'm not doing any work on the Lightning Network. That will probably change here very soon, but working on the layer twos, improving Bitcoin's, overall, backup plans and security posture on the core protocol, building those tools like that. It's not, I don't lose sleep over it because I see it happening, but it is a personal sense of urgency. Is it like, it's not, the adoption curve is inevitable, but it can be sped up, right? And that's what, personally I'm trying to do.
Do you think that it's just education that's holding people back? Like in terms of when people ask, why hasn't it decoupled yet from other risk assets like equities? Is it just a matter of education and maybe not enough regulatory clarity, at least on the institutional side where it creates those on-ramps?
I think both of those things matter a lot. Those are good points, but I think, I don't know, maybe I'm dumb. In my view, the reason, those two things matter to the coupling or the lack of decoupling, but I actually think that I think it's dumber. Like, I think it's that people have debt and obligations denominated in USD. And so when shit goes bad in the economy, what's easier to sell, your house or your Bitcoin? Your business or your Bitcoin, your collectibles or your Bitcoin. Is that Bitcoin being the most saleable good around, and with a 24-hour trading, so it's just very easy to buy and sell Bitcoin. And therefore, like, if the government's asking for dollars and you got to come up with dollars somehow, Bitcoin's going to be one of the first things you sell, just like equities, in certain cases are, is so, correlated to general declines. The decoupling happens when Bitcoin's further along its monetization curve, right? Where if you have obligations and debts denominated in Bitcoin, then and things are going bad, well, you're not going to sell your Bitcoin, you're going to sell something else, right? And I think that's just a natural monetization effect of Bitcoin. So if you have payroll, if you have vendors, if you have your restaurants that you go to take Bitcoin, that's how you pay them. If that's what your babysitter wants, that's what, whatever, that starts the decoupling in my mind. But again, I might be, illiterate on macro compared to many guests you've had before.
No, I love that response. Well, to start to wrap up, I know that you're
Mhm.
sort of in two places, right? You're in Wyoming and you're in
Mhm.
Texas. Texas is trying to be, a capital for Bitcoin, but Wyoming also, very
Mhm.
popular for Bitcoiners and a great state when you're setting up companies or trusts. I know that. So tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about which one's going to come out swinging as more of the Bitcoin hub? Texas?
Texas has a huge population, right? Already existing infrastructure, existing all these things. Texas is going to be just fine. So Texas will take care of itself, and it will be probably the biggest hub for Bitcoin. However, the great state of Wyoming, you're right. I mean, it is an impressive place. If you have any foreign listeners, what foreigners think Texas is, Wyoming actually is. Um, you know, Going up to your favorite restaurant, people on horseback, that's like a regular occurrence, right?
Yeah, no
No,
cowboys riding around in Austin that I saw. But
no, not so much. Mostly Teslas. Uh, and No, I mean Wyoming has a lot going for it though. Wyoming is an energy-rich state. It's a nimble legislature to like attract companies. It has incredible LLC privacy laws. Like you said, the trust setups are like, anyone who lives in Texas is setting up their family trust in Wyoming. But it's also absolutely drop dead beautiful all the time. It has a lot going for it, but really what it has going for it is that, like Texas, it's an energy rich state. Oil, gas, coal, it has it all. And as that becomes more and more important and population centers start gravitating towards energy centers because you don't have to transmit it and have line loss and all these other problems, I think Bitcoin will be a big part of the story of Wyoming gaining in population because look, I mean, Wyoming has 530,000 people. There's a lot of space, right? But it has great laws, nimble legislature, and the number one thing you need for a future Bitcoin economy, which is to be around energy. So I think people will flock there, and I encourage people to look at it. I mean, like it's not just the stuff that you can do as a business, but like you said, the trust setups, uh, getting the entities you need for tax advantage status, all that. It's all there, and it's wonderful.
I went to Wyoming for the first time this year for Bitcoin Ski Summit, and it was so
Yes.
beautiful. But I have to see it in the summer because I heard it's even more amazing. Jackson Hole and all these
Oh
beautiful
yeah.
towns. And shout out to so many great Bitcoiners there: Senator Lummis and Annalise and Caitlin Long, who was just on my other show.
Mm-hmm.
So love it. All right, what do you want to leave us with? What's your takeaway message for everyone out there, whether they're long-term holders or maybe they're looking at the price, wondering, is the bottom in? Should I buy now? Like, what's your final message?
Don't try to time the market. It doesn't matter. Everyone gets as much Bitcoin as they deserve. Timing the market will drive you crazy. You can't do it. No one can do it. Who knows what the bottom is? Who knows what the top is? Stack sats, stay humble, and hold your own keys. And if you're trying to stack sats right now, come check us out at Unchained. We're doing it in a really secure, awesome way.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Will.
Thanks, Natalie. Appreciate it.